Hello, this is Julie Heath, and I'd like to speak about the learning disability subgroup Dyscalculia. Dys means difficulty, calculia means calculation. So this disability is about having difficulty learning in math. Let's look at the symptoms. The most important symptom in this disability is the difficulty understanding quantity. These individuals have a difficult time mapping numbers to values and quantities. They also have a difficulty with working memory, and so you can see how that would be problematic for fact memorization and formula memorization. They also have immature counting strategies, and they're very glued to the ones place, basically. So for example, in immature counting strategies, taking 3 plus 2, the student would go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and then they'd have to start at 1 and count the whole fact. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they wouldn't be able to count on easily. That would really have to be taught over and over to this type of a student. Using strategies like near facts would not come easily to them. Also, looking at a number in the hundredths place. When they saw 0.05, this child would just see 5 as being 5 and not really understand the concept of the value of that place. So in understanding those first 3 symptoms, everything else kind of makes sense why a student would struggle. In place value, number lines, positive and negative values, carrying and borrowing, which we now call regrouping, understanding and doing word problems, sequencing, steps and problems, understanding fractions and decimals, very difficult for these children. Making change in money, putting language to processes, understanding time, and then another difficulty is organizing the numbers on the paper and making all of those numbers, like in the long division problem, line up so that they can actually do the operation. And I do see in this list an overlap between difficulties that individuals with dyslexia and dysgraphia have and individuals with dyscalculia. There are definitely some overlaps involved. So the fix for this, or the remediation that teachers can use, is explicit systematic instruction, which that's what we need to be doing in language deficits as well. So it only makes sense that this is the type of instruction that children with learning disabilities, individuals with learning disabilities of all ages need. And so without going through this whole list right now, I want to just highlight that the teacher is going to need to provide scaffolded, guided, and independent practice until mastery. So lots and lots of practice. That's difficult for me to think about because I know that these children also are going to possibly have slow processing, and they might have fine motor difficulties, which makes practice difficult in the first place. But this is what's needed for their success. And another thing that I want to highlight is that the teacher is going to have to be very explicit in making connections. These children are not going to be able to go from the concrete manipulative stage to the abstract stage without the teacher really verbally and modeling, making those connections for them. They're not going to be able to intuitively make connections. And also just that the teacher is going to need to be there just all along, all of the steps as they practice, providing corrective feedback before they fail, before they keep making the same mistake over and over again, just really helping them all along. And then, of course, in the bottom, the cumulative review is always important. So what about the components of the UDL lesson? Well, the first one is representation. And again, these students have a hard time visualizing quantity and understanding quantity. So they're going to need to be able to feel, see, touch math. They're going to need lots of manipulatives. So I just gave a list, things that we already use in our classrooms, probably like cubes and blocks and fraction circles, cues and air rods, three-dimensional shapes like to find area, coins and clocks. And the thing I want to point out here is I think that we're really good at this on the kindergarten, pre-kindergarten through like third grade level, we've got the manipulatives going. But these students are going to continue to need these concrete manipulatives all the way through. So you can see them possibly for a few students in a 7th grade classroom or in a 10th grade geometry class. These students will continue to need this concrete representation throughout their career in math. Then the next component of presentation is the visual representation. So they're going to need to be able to see drawings and strip diagrams. And I love this next one because, like I said, it's hard for them to get past the ones place. And so something like that might help them to understand what 5/100ths really means. So they'll need visual representation. And then some of them are not struggling at all in language. They might have language strengths, or they might prefer auditory learning. And so teachers can provide like memorable mnemonics to help these students, and they can have the students themselves during the presentation part of the lesson verbalize, lots of talking going on, verbalizing or writing. They can write about what they're doing in math, and that can really help those that have those language strengths actually to be able to succeed in math. And then because their cognitive load is going to be so heavy in terms of being able to understand what's going on in the math lesson, teachers need to provide these students with filled-in notes and filled-in graphic organizers so that when they get home, they have something to review. Because during the math lesson, they are going to be completely engaged in just listening and seeing and touching and writing all of whatever the presentation includes, and they're not necessarily going to be able to be filling in notes. But they're still going to need that to study at home, and their parents will need that too. And another part of the presentation that I wanted to make note of is in the IRIS presentation, it was noted by the author or the writer of that module. I went through a module by IRIS about teaching struggling students math. And in that module, it was presented that using concrete representational, so like those visual representations, and abstract all at the same time for older students can be very helpful. So I thought that was interesting, and I put the link of that module. It was highly helpful to me to go through that and understand more about helping students with dyscalculia in math. And so let's go on to also a huge part of math, and some would say maybe even the most important part of math, is the word problems, because it's the real life application of math. And so again, the same module presented a way of teaching word problems and teaching identifying the type of word problem. We as teachers, sometimes we try to teach the catchphrases or the little words like all together and remove to help students to say, okay, I see all together. This must be an addition problem. And this is a way to teach 4 different structures that word problems can fall into. The problem itself, not just a little word, and being able to identify which type of problem it is based on it's called schema instruction. So there's 4 schemas that all word problems will fall into. And I can't go into great detail about that, but I encourage you. I know I'm going to present this to teachers in my school. I think this would really help these students to be able to be taught word problems in this way. Now, moving on to the next component of the UDL lesson, which is the expression. These students, in order to be able to practice and then later get assessed in their learning, they're going to need the following to be designed into the lesson. They're going to need extra time. That's going to be very important for them. They're going to need to be able to use a fact sheet or a calculator. So I do love that idea of writing the goal and then removing the barriers. And in doing so, if your goal is for them to be able to perform long division, And then you can remove the barrier of those multiplication facts they don't know by providing them a multiplication table. So that's really important. Encouraging the use of colors for them, that will help a lot of them as they practice to do certain steps in certain colors. I love the website IXL for independent practice. It comes with really great digital incentives, like little prizes that they get. It gives individualized instruction for them and practice for them until mastery. And it has embedded instruction, so if they're not having any kind of language deficits, they're going to be able to click and they're going to be able to read. If they're having problems, they'll be able to read some further instruction that might help them to master a certain concept. ModMath is an excellent math app. It was developed by parents of an individual struggling with dysgraphia, and it is kind of like the word processor for math. That's how I like to think of it. It looks like graph paper, and the student can just click on it and type the number and line up their problems beautifully. And it's free. There you can pay for some more, but the free app is very wonderful and helpful. I would highly recommend it if they're having difficulty lining up numbers, that they use that instead. And then the teacher in the guided practice time is going to need to identify, interpret errors, and tell the students why. Again, all kinds of explicit instruction where they're not making these connections by themselves. And then providing keys for steps and formulas. So again, write your goal and then remove the barriers. If the goal isn't for them to memorize a formula, if it's to apply a formula, then provide them the formula. And then for the assessment part, again, these students are going to need extra time. And sometimes that's going to be up to 1.5 to 2 times as much as their peers. And CAST, of course, suggests to conduct formative assessments often. And I just want to suggest conducting summative assessments often and in smaller pieces instead of this huge unit test that's going to take the child 2 hours or 2 class periods where it took his peers 1 class period. What about just giving pieces of the test throughout the unit, just the parts, so that it's not so overwhelming and daunting a task? Excuse me. Then also, again, remove those barriers. And so I gave all kinds of examples of that, and my time is running short. So I do want to just notice use of fingers. Their fingers are connected to their body. And so when they're struggling with quantity, even if they're an older student, they need to be able to use their fingers because it's going to help connect them to the value or the amount of numbers. And so don't shame them as they get older, or teachers, not saying you, but teachers should be careful not to shame them and let them use their fingers as tools. And then of course manipulatives, and that the ModMath can even be used for the assessment piece. And because it's like a word processor. It can save, and it can be sent by email or put into Google Docs and shared. It's very neat if you've never seen it. And it really kind of frees up the parent scribe, or maybe the special education teacher scribe, for the student that struggles with fine motor, and gives them that independence. And then for engagement, I'm going to have to skip because my time is almost up here, but I think the key here is to write story problems and word problems that speak to the students' interests. Give them choices, like maybe 3 different problems of different levels of challenge that all meet the goal. Use songs for your talkers. Talk through the process and let them kind of express themselves as they work. Let them illustrate, make up their own word problems and then illustrate them. That's highly engaging for students. And then give them choice, like maybe they want to work independently because they're shy. Maybe they want to work in groups and they can peer teach each other, and that helps as well. The last page is just some of these resources. I highly recommend the podcast, or whatever it was called, the webinar by Attitude Magazine. It was excellent. And IXL and Mod Math are some tools that could really help students with dyscalculia that you might intervene for in your classrooms. So I would recommend you check those out. I am all ears. I am not a math person, so I am all ears for what you have to